Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov. It's great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and martech. I am very excited to welcome back a longtime friend of the show here, Ethan Chernofsky, Senior Vice President of Marketing at Placer.ai, who's joining us today from New York. Ethan, so nice to have you back with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So good you were here. I know you always have great content for us. And today you'll be sharing more on location-based analytics around retail performance, consumer behavior, and key trends shaping the retail space. We're also really fortunate that you'll be sticking around for a Q&A in the second part of the show. So I want to remind our audience that you can use the chat window on the right of your screen to tell us where you're joining us from today and to submit questions. Ethan and I will do our best to get to as many of those as we can during the Q&A, so please keep those coming. All right, Ethan, I'm going to pass it to you to get started.
All right. Thank you so much, Marissa. So as always, we love to do a quick kind of look at what is the data that's going to be informing our perspective today and always. So who is Placer? Placer is a location analytics company. What that means in the very simplest of terms is people vote with their feet. We show you how they vote across the United States every single day. We do that by observing a panel of tens of millions of devices very critically. This is all aggregate data that has been stripped of identifiers like MAID, so we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then analyze that panel with AI and machine learning algorithms and present it in a wealth of different reports on our platform on everything from visits, the customer journey, true trade areas, and a whole lot more. And we actually have something new that we just launched with eMarketer, where our Placer 100, which looks at top dining and retail players, and has those widgets available on the eMarketer website.
Yeah, which is so exciting. I've actually been exploring that hub since it went live, and I know our audience is really going to enjoy having access to data from millions of US store visits right at their fingertips each month. So I encourage all of you to check it out on the right of the video player, and you can take a peek at the hub. So let's now put that data to use. Ethan, let's start by discussing some of the foot traffic trends that you've been seeing. When you look at overall retail performance through the first half of this year, 2024, does that align with expectations? And beyond that, what does that tell us about the health of brick and mortar retail?
So I think when we think about what our expectations were for the year, there was this assumption of continuation of what we had been seeing. So there's still kind of this wider sense of economic uncertainty. Things haven't fully stabilized or gotten better completely. And so we expected kind of more of the same. And we started off the year seeing dips in visits. Now, what was interesting there is it was really exaggerated in the early parts of January and then slowly got better. And that was kind of, we assumed that was related to weather, right? So we had inclement weather in the early stages of January, but then it got better as the months kind of wore, as the weeks wore on, excuse me, and that continued throughout. So the only place where we see a little bit of weirdness is between March and April, but that was actually more related to when Easter fell out. So the comps of like this specific week. So like early April was down a little bit, late March was way up. But if you actually kind of would align that with when it had fallen out the exact time the year before, it would look a lot smoother. You wouldn't see that same degree of variance. But what we essentially saw was not only did we see strength in terms of retail visits, but it was fairly consistent across the United States, which really supports this kind of hypothesis that we are experiencing this wider brick and mortar retail renaissance. So if the pre-pandemic period was the defining narrative was the retail apocalypse, we've certainly transitioned into something far more positive and far more successful. But I think it really matters in terms of the way we think about strategy and we understand how strategies around stores are changing. So there's so much conversation about omnichannel, obviously, but whereas pre-pandemic, omnichannel essentially meant digital channels, omni also means utilizing the store more effectively. So utilizing it from an operational perspective, from a media perspective, from an advertising perspective, from a distribution and fulfillment perspective. But also, I think one of the key things that we've been looking at quite a bit is understanding what are the gatekeepers towards maximizing that renaissance. So if you have this flood of people coming to your stores, what is that store experience really like? And who are the gatekeepers to store experience? And very often that's the frontline worker. So how empowered is that frontline worker to really serve the customer that comes through, to ensure that they're having a great experience, they're finding the products that they're looking for, and perhaps even more importantly, they're purchasing the products either at the store or at that retailer's website afterwards. So it's creating that experience in the store that drives a transaction with in a retailer's kind of full perspective and entities.
All right. Well, that's definitely helpful to set the stage for what we've seen in the first half of the year, thinking about some of those changes in store visits. So thank you. You actually brought up some strengths, and the strength of the wider mall sector has actually been really noteworthy, with some top tier malls across various formats seeing success. What does this tell us about consumer preference and also the future of retail?
So I think what's really interesting here is from a consumer preference perspective, we're seeing all of these elements where we were told it's over. Like the mall is a thing of the past. We're basically seeing very quickly that that concept is getting debunked. Now, what's interesting though is just because that concept is being debunked doesn't mean change isn't happening. And in fact, a lot of change is happening, but there's some really interesting elements about that change. So the first is that the mall experience is evolving and succeeding because it changed, and that change was planned a long time ago. And it's a really important distinction because sometimes we see successes as being kind of overly connected to tailwinds or headwinds, or struggles or successes being overly related to tailwinds or headwinds. So I'm doing really well. It's because I'm a value-oriented retailer in a time when value's kind of the key. I'm not doing so well. It's because my sector is not well positioned for what's going on. Malls are positioned well and succeeding now because of decisions that mall owners made. So to diversify tenant mix, to be less oriented towards apparel and beauty. And this is something that happened a decade more prior in order of shifting that focus. So what's interesting here is top tier landlords and top tier retail players see how things are evolving and we're able to make the changes in order to position themselves ahead of that wave. The second element here is that there is an evolution of consumer expectation towards experience. So I don't just want to have retail for the sake of retail. It's not just to buy the product. There is an experience that must be built in around it. An experience that gets me to come. So it could be to try on, touch and feel the product, whatever it may be, engage with the brand, but also experiences around it. So if you want me to have a longer visit, a higher magnitude visit, a likelier of spending more, you better have lots of things going on that keep me in that space for an extended period of time. The third piece here is really interesting is that it has a waterfall effect. So it's not when you have success like this, and that success is focused on better understanding what consumers want and addressing what consumers want, it actually creates more opportunity. Because if I'm trying to fit in less retail in a space, then those other retailers that want to be part of that space now need to find somewhere else. So I can create these other complementary experiences elsewhere. And that's something that's really positive because it means that one success has a ripple effect that brings success elsewhere. And I think the last bit is that it's foundational. This isn't a change of like, hey, think about Sephora and Ulta. They're amazing retailers doing brilliant work. But their success is a success for their segment. The success of malls is actually like a foundational success that allows lots of other players to benefit. So the fact that these shopping centers are able to transition effectively, drive visits, drive engagement, drive a higher magnitude of visit is unbelievably significant because it creates more opportunities for more players who operate within those ecosystems.
Right. So it seems like this evolution of the mall can really touch the consumer at so many different times in their day. Maybe I go in and get my coffee, do a little shopping. Maybe there's an appointment that I have that happens to be based in that mall.
Yeah, but I think, and you touched on something so interesting there, because imagine there's a mall that's like, it's the perfect mall for the weekend. I don't know, we go, we do the shopping we want to do. There's great places to grab dinner. There's an awesome movie theater to catch a movie in the middle of the day. There's experiences, etc. And there's other malls that are more oriented towards fitness, and then the juice bar nearby, and then kind of an Aspen Dental because I need to, pop the kids over in the middle of the day. That all works, and it doesn't necessarily compete. And that's what's really exciting about it is it's fairly complementary, and it addresses one of the major concerns that kind of plagued the mall space was that it felt way too copy and paste from one center to the next.
Well, this really speaks to a lot of the changes that we're seeing in consumer shopping behavior and patterns. You and I have spoken a lot about how the pandemic has changed shopping patterns, but how has the economic uncertainty that followed the pandemic impacted those same patterns?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been really fascinating for us to look at because I think the first thing we saw, if we think about the grocery sector more widely, pandemic, it sees this huge surge. It's essential retail. People are cooking at home. They can't necessarily, eat out the way they did. They can't eat the way they did. So they're focusing more on what they can do in the house. That transitions away where we still see visits going up. But what's been fascinating is we're seeing changes in those behaviors. So one of the really interesting ones is the increase of cross shopping between grocery chains, which essentially means if I used to go to just HEB, I'm now going to HEB and Aldi and maybe somewhere else, right? And so my grocery shop is now dispersed. So it's possible I'm purchasing more, but I'm very likely purchasing more in multiple entities, which changes the calculus for grocery players. So it says to them, it's not just about driving visits, it's about driving magnitude of visit. It's about driving basket size. It's about understanding, hey, why is someone leaving my location and then going to another competing grocer to get something else? Is it price? Is it quality? Is it certain types of items? So whether it's specialty grocery, Trader Joe's, like that has items that people fall in love with, what is it that is making me go there? But also, what is it that's making me not do my full shop there? So there's this really fascinating conversation taking place within the grocery space, but in others as well, of asking, how do I centralize more and more of the spend in just my location? So if the pandemic was the height of the opportunity, I made fewer visits, I spent more time during those visits. Now there is more competition to not just get someone to come in my doors, but get that individual, that visitor to do more and purchase more of that list within my location.
Right, because it sounds like from what you've just described that the customer is more open now to allocating more time to go between stores for things versus really the mindset of just let me do everything all in one place.
Yeah, because if there's essentially a few factors that are going to contribute to the way I purchase, right? One is seeking a value. So it could be there's some items that are really expensive and I'm willing to spend on those items, but there's some items that are expensive and I will do the cheap version. Like I don't need to, I don't know, can corn. I don't necessarily need the fancy brand. I'm ready to go down and do private label at somewhere where it's a little bit less expensive, or I want to spend on produce, or I want to spend on protein, whatever it may be. The other piece there, so you have quality, but you also have value. And then that last piece is specialty, like what has something or who has something that I can't get somewhere else for whatever reason. And so those elements are all coming into play as consumers decide where they want to shop and how much of their shop they want to get done within each specific location.
Right. Okay. Well, we just talked a lot about where we shop and how that's changed, but have there have there been any shifts in when we shop and times a day? And if so, what does this indicate?
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is that to a large extent, we're seeing things that look a lot more like pre-pandemic than they did at the height. We're seeing things go back. Those evening visits are coming back in certain spaces, right? Like groceries, a great example. But there's other spaces that have seen fundamental shifts in their patterns, and they don't appear to be going back the same way. So, for example, we see that times are shifting in the fitness space when we would go. So, normally, when we would look at the fitness sector, we'd see this really tremendous peak in Q1. So, January would be really strong, February, even stronger year over year. March, a little bit less. And then we'd see this slow decline. September would be the nadir. October would see a peak, and then we'd drop significantly November, December. And it was just essentially watching our collective focus on going to the gym decline over the course of the year. So we would start off with a ton of vigor and excitement, and that would change. Now that's different than it was before. There are significant peaks, April, May, and June in Q3 and Q4. And that changes the way these brands operate. So their battle is different now in terms of what they are trying to incentivize, how they're trying to engage with you. The models that they build around providing customer service change tremendously. So if I have more people coming in June than used to be coming in June, do I need more staff? Do I need a different kind of customer-oriented experience in order to elevate what people can get or experience within my location? It changes quite a bit. And it's really interesting because it's different from segment to segment. So brick and mortar more broadly is not experiencing any one trend here. They're experiencing many changes across many different spaces, and that's what keeps things really interesting.
All right. Well, let's switch gears now. Let's talk about some of those migration patterns. We know in the past few years, a lot of people have moved out of major cities due to flexible working environments. They don't always have to come into the office every day. What does the data tell us about consumer sentiment and potentially retail strategy around this?
So I think what's the starting point about people moving is to ask, why are they moving, right? Because I think if you think back, obviously, it feels like 70 years ago when the pandemic was just a few. There was this, oh, it's the exodus from the cities. People are abandoning cities en masse, and they're never going back. That obviously wasn't true. The narrative was very much exaggerated. But when we look and we really dive into where people moved and why, what we see is it was a very rational process, right? It's people moving from places where they could only rent to a place where they can afford to buy, where cost of living was higher to cost of living is lower, where the schools were not as good to where the schools are better. The fit for families was not as good, the fit for families is better. And we see families moving. So there's a very rational approach to why I'm going to these places. And it's a significant element to kind of embrace because it's expensive to move, especially between states. And that has very significant implications for retailers and for brands because it says the reason people are going is because they've thought it through and they've recognized that there's something better for them in this other place. Therefore, they're likely to stay. And a lot of retailers and a lot of retail decision making needs to be understood within the lens of my audience is no longer where it was pre-pandemic. I need to figure out where they are. I need to figure out what are their new needs. And therefore, I need to interact with them differently than I did before. So much of hey, the customer hasn't really changed. They just want this. I mean, that is a lovely thing to say, but it's just not reality, right? The reality for someone who moves from a place where cost of living is higher to cost of living is lower is very significant because I have the opportunity to interact with them around products that they might not have looked to spend on in the past, but now would be willing to. And I think understanding these mindsets and these mindset shifts is unbelievably significant, not just to where retailers want to be, where product companies want to be, and where they want to advertise and how they want to message.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'd actually love to hear from our audience in the chat. Did you move during the pandemic due to flexible working environments? Please let us know. Ethan knows that I have stayed in the city throughout the past few years, and continue to live in Manhattan. But a lot of people have gone elsewhere due to changes in their lifestyle. So we'd love to hear from you. I brought up return to office, in these flexible working environments. That's been a huge topic for businesses. We're still hearing businesses changing their strategy. So what's the latest here for what you're seeing at Placer, and what does this mean for retailers, brands, and advertisers?
There's certain things that are holding pretty steady, and there's certain things that are still changing, right? And this has been the conversation for about a year or so, but we need to kind of figure out where our starting point is and then therefore where we think our ending point. The things that are staying the same, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are far more significant for the in-office work week than Monday and Friday. That seems to have real staying power. What is staying the same? Hybrid work, right? People are not coming back to the office 5 days a week. It does not appear that that is going to happen, not in a year, likely not in 2 to 3 years. Who knows beyond that? The world's been crazy enough, but that's what it appears. At the same time, it's very difficult to say, oh, this is, to quote our favorite language of the post-pandemic, the new normal, because things are continuing to change. And if we look at where retail visits were, when many were saying, that's it, the office is gone, it's dead, it's never coming back, it's come back actually quite a bit. And right now it's about, if you look nationwide, about 70% of where it was pre-pandemic. Now that's heavily weighed down by cities like San Francisco, which are much further down. And it's pulled up by cities like New York or Miami, where the return to office is more significant. Now, there are sector-based impacts here. So if I work in finance, I'm more likely to be in the office more. If I work in high tech, it makes it a little bit easier for me to work from wherever I want. But looking away from that, this idea that we're going to see a continued rise towards, in my opinion, somewhere between 75 and 80% of where we were pre-pandemic is the likeliest endpoint for the next few years, though there's a lot of different opinions that kind of around where we believe we're actually going to end up.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just as I think I'm seeing some patterns on the subway for different days of the week, then the next week it changes to something else. So I'm still evaluating that as well. But good to see what you're seeing from the data from Placer. Another, you brought up sectors in particular. The value sector has also been enjoying some major tailwinds as of late. What's your read on this one? Where do you think that there could be a ceiling for this growth?
I think one of the most important narratives to understand retail over the last 5 to 10 years has been the bifurcation of retail. And there's some really brilliant champions of that narrative, and I think they've been largely correct. Retail has essentially moved to two places. It's moved to value and it's moved to luxury. Now, luxury has different lanes, right? There's, extreme luxury, and everyone kind of finds their place within that. Value has been this kind of, hey, let's just seek to do as much as possible. And that drove a lot of the expansions of discount and dollar players. So Dollar General, Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, Five Below, Big Lots, all the above were part of these rapid expansions. Yet we've seen that start to cap. So either slowdowns of expansions, actual closures of stores, shifts in terms of strategy. So whether it be Dollar General launching and leaning heavily into Pop Shelf, which is slightly up market, whether it be Five Below looking to aim a little bit higher in terms of its price points, there is this move of like creating different layers within the value chain. And I actually think it moves us away from a pure bifurcation model to a return of the middle, right? Why is that? Because there's just less competition and there's ultimately an issue of saturation. There's only so many dollar stores you need within a certain region, right? There's only so much that it can handle. And I think the nature of the expansion, the amount of the overlap just led to a little bit of an overestimation of how much was really needed. And we're starting to see things balance out where we're going to see store closures. We're going to see efforts made to kind of hit that middle more effectively, get out of that pure extreme value lane, go a little bit higher. And that's going to be a really significant next wave of where retail is heading.
Well, if there is this return to the middle, how important is value to performance?
I mean, really important within context. And so the way I think that I've had this disagreement with others, but the for me the standard bearer of the middle is Target, right? Target understands what we want to spend on. So Target gets that we want to save money on socks, but we're willing to spend more money on toys, and that's why they have Disney Store in stores or Apple Store in stores. Like there are things that we will spend more on, but there are things we want to spend less on. That's what defines the middle. It's not pure value and it's not pure luxury. It's a mix of both. And I think that's likely where we're going to head. And I think we're seeing it a lot with what brands like Dollar General are trying.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about small format stores. We hear a lot about the rise of these for a variety of different retailers. What's causing this trend and why does this even matter?
So I think small format matters a lot. It's one of the kind of buzzier topics that I really lean into. And I lean into it for a couple of reasons. One, it gives a lot of flexibility to retailers. If I need a massive space, I either need to spend a ton of money in certain areas or I can't go into those areas. If I can have small format, I have a lot more flexibility in terms of where I can actually set up a location. So when we talked about audiences are moving, they're shifting, they're in different places. If I want to move along with them, that flexibility offers me a lot of opportunity. It also gives me the opportunity to be much more focused on the experience I provide in each location. So which products do I need in different stores should change. One of my favorite, retail stories ever, and I believe it was in Retail Dive, I want to give credit where credit was due, was about how Target did a totally different store in East Lansing, right near Michigan State University, than it did just a few miles away in another Target location. One had everything you would need to be a college student, and the other had a totally different range of products that families would need because it was in a suburb near major, kind of a big suburban area. So I think that understanding is really significant. I think the big change, though, it really sits with who is using it and what are the experiences they want to provide. Because I think we're still in the first wave of small format where things like kind of Bloomies versus Bloomingdale's like offers that excitement. But as we start to play with this more and more, we're going to see different versions of this. And Some of them are going to fail miserably, but that is part of the process of testing and understanding because not every concept works brilliantly right from the start. And retailers need to figure out what's the right mix in each area as they optimize that strategy.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think as we see more and more of these formats, it will be interesting to watch what consumers gravitate to and where they're okay with having a limited amount of merchandise or a smaller amount versus when they want the full experience within the store. So I guess we'll be keeping an eye out for that. We cannot talk about retail without bringing up the topic of retail media. So let's dive into that. That space has seen so many new additions. What really is the potential for this channel, given the influx of players here?
So I think what's interesting is, and it's an important clarifying point. I am a huge bullish believer in the power of retail media in the physical environment. That hasn't changed. I think one of the things that becomes increasingly clear the longer you look at this space is there's lots of excitement. There's lots of recognition of what it should be able to provide. There is also lots of recognition of the barriers, right? Interestingly enough, the barriers are less at this point about creating something that's annoying, right? So if we think about a lot of our online shopping experience, the biggest problem with the media thing was it either wasn't native, it wasn't additive, so it wasn't providing enough value, or it wasn't nice as a consumer. Like we don't really have that problem yet in the in-store environment. The problem we have is accessibility. And part of that is because of the early stage of what we're getting involved in. So, I mean, in this map, you look at Costco, Sam's Club, and BJ's, and where they are the dominant player, it's really spread out, which means if I want to hit wholesale audiences, I would need to have a direct relationship with Costco's retail media, with Sam's Club's retail media, and with BJ's Wholesale Club's retail media. Now, obviously, Sam's Club benefits from being under the Walmart umbrella, but that's still a lot to expect. And I think one of the big elements that's going to be potentially the tipping point in this space, if I had to gamble on what the in-store retail media tipping point is, it's accessibility. How do I reach multiple networks with nuance, with audience-based targeting, with the ability to bring the right message to the right types of locations at scale? When that gets solved, then you have an unlock that allows many more brands to get their feet wet and really dive into what is going on here and what makes this perspective so promising.
Great, thank you. And I see you have a chart there on Wawa gaining market share, and as two people from Pennsylvania, I think that one is close to our heart here. So thanks for putting that one in for us. All right, so let's talk about some segments now that have had quite a few changes. Two segments in particular that benefited from the pandemic, such as consumer electronics and home improvement. These are ones that have really struggled to come back from previous demand, but there are signs that a recovery is taking place. So what does this recovery tell us about these segments and also how we judge their performance?
So I think I mean, we have hammered this home for several years now. Context, context, context. And we could say it 1,000 more times. It matters so much when we're trying to understand performance. And I think very often we have a tendency to look at a poor earnings report or a series of poor earnings reports and say, this retailer isn't doing that well, when it's actually just facing really significant headwinds or being compared to something that's really challenging, or it's not being given the right perspective necessary to understand its successes and lacks thereof. What's interesting right now is that both of these segments are rebounding, right? So home improvement is starting to recover. It even had months with year-over-year visit growth. Consumer electronics is starting to recover. So that gives us this feeling like that pull forward of demand is starting to dissipate. Those negative headwinds that were limiting growth are starting to pull back. And the comparison to a year that wasn't as great last year is starting to give a better environment for them to show some success. Now, what's amazing is these are really significant parts of the retail landscape. So if these two segments start coming back, one, it's obviously very positive for retail. But two, if we think about what these products are and what they mean, there's a lot of reason for optimism and excitement. And what do I mean by that? One of the bigger challenges they have faced in their recovery is the fact that I can put off buying a couch. If I have a couch at home and I need to replenish it, does it need to happen next week? Certain products need to be replenished at a very specific cadence. Your couch doesn't. You can delay the new couch. So if I can delay the new couch, then in a difficult economic environment, that's something I'm putting off. I can delay the new computer. So in a difficult economic environment, that's something I'm pushing off. If we see these segments start to recover, it gives us a sense the consumer is back to, you know what, I can get away with this. I can splurge on the new couch. I can splurge on the new computer or video game system or whatever it may be. And that gives us a very positive sense of what's coming, especially as we head into a really critical back to school season.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, back to school, or maybe someone's going to ask for that couch or that computer on their holiday list. And, now that we're in July, we're in the second half of the year. So, of course, we need to start thinking about the holiday time. Holidays play such a key role in driving retail performance. Do you think retail has effectively taken advantage of this opportunity?
I think many retailers do a very good job of thinking about holidays. I think one of the most consistent challenges we see is that they don't focus enough on why the holidays are different and therefore what can they do to maximize them. So, I mean, the most interesting thing is you look at the day before Mother's Day, May 11th, and the day before Father's Day, June 15th, and you look at it year over year, their Hallmark location saw a 140% year over year increase the day before Mother's Day. Father's Day saw a 55% increase, right? What does that tell us? It tells us the thing we value for Father's Day is very different than the thing we value for Mother's Day. So, Dick's Sporting Goods and other sports and recreational goods retailers see a much bigger boost pre-Father's Day. Other types of brands like jewelry, which makes sense, see a much bigger boost before Mother's Day. Now, this stuff is all very, very obvious when we say it out loud, but it's very surprising how often the strategy doesn't shift enough. So one of our favorite things to look at is kind of who creates holidays or who leans into these fake holidays. And we're using the term holiday very broadly, but our favorite from this year was the solar eclipse or the whatever the eclipse was. It was an eclipse of something. I think it was the full solar eclipse, right? Like
it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Did you wear the glasses?
I did not. I saw a picture of it. It seemed really cool. I did not. But it was really interesting to see brands that leaned into it. So Allbirds leaned into it. Not Allbirds, excuse me. Warby Parker leaned into it with like special glasses, and Krispy Kreme leaned into it with kind of a special themed donut, and that's brilliant. We want to see more of that, which is retailers, dining players thinking about what is the small change, the adjacent move, not some crazy creative idea, but a small shift that allows me to get ahead of things that are happening on the calendar so that I can own that more effectively. And I think it's one of the great marketing opportunities for brands that do it very well. And I think it's one of the ones that really you scratch your head when you're like, why isn't this brand leaning into this opportunity?
Right. Well, those are some really good examples. The eclipse, I didn't even think about that. So those are some great examples for who's leading in. So thank you for sharing that. Well, we talked a little bit about holiday and some key moments. Let's talk about back to school now. Even though it's July and we're talking about holiday, the winter is still a ways away, luckily. So let's talk about one of the big events that is coming up right now, which is back to school. The two of us, we both have kids, so we are going to start our back to school shopping pretty soon. So let me get your take on this. What are your expectations for the back to school season in retail?
So I think it's a combination of what we've seen. So we've seen retail doing well overall. We've seen some key segments starting to come back. So home improvement and consumer electronics, which is obviously very impacted by the back to school season. That tells us, again, consumers in a pretty good place. And the retail visits are in a pretty good place overall, which gives us a sense that we're going to see very strong visits in this holiday season. So that July and August could be very strong. Is it a guarantee? Of course not. Are there many other factors at play? Of course. But right now, things seem quite positive, and there's no reason to believe that this summer season is going to be any less positive than what we've seen in recent months, which again could be great for right now, but also give us a positive indication of what's to come during the holiday season as well.
Right. Well, we are looking forward to that. And yeah, I can't even believe school will be here so soon. Ethan, you ready for some questions from our audience?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, that was really fun. Thank you so much for all of that great content. And in advance of those questions, thank you to our audience for engaging with us. Keep those questions coming as we go through some of the ones that have come in already. All right, Ethan, the first one, what are some trends in the service segment? For example, travel agencies. What are you seeing here?
So interestingly enough, we haven't really looked into travel as visits to kind of travel agencies, but we have seen kind of this consistent growth in domestic tourism. So people are certainly traveling, they're certainly moving about. I think this kind of, if we think about that immediate year or two post-pandemic, was very much about products. That period beyond that has been very much about experiences. So that return, there's certainly this kind of pent-up demand for it that's lasted. So there's definitely a lot of weight behind the movement towards travel and tourism and experience, and we don't see that dissipating in the near term.
All right. Thank you for that. Our next viewer asks about stores that had closed during the pandemic. So, of course, there were stores that closed but then have since reopened. Does this impact the customer's brand perception or consideration?
I think it depends. A lot of the retailers that we looked at that were closing stores were, especially when you think about the larger retailers, they were either, the Bed Bath and Beyonds of the world, where they were going away. That was, they were major players and they had some strategic issues and it just didn't work out. A lot of it was about optimization. So there was a big push for a lot of retailers to shrink their retail footprint. And I think a lot of that was, if I can reach my audience with 80 stores, why do I need 100 stores? And one of the ways we looked at that was who had lots of cannibalization in terms of true trade areas. So if I left my house and I could choose this Macy's or that Macy's, and they were both 15 minutes away, and I was actually frequenting both over the course of a 6-month period, I probably didn't need both locations. And so that was something, but that's an optimization play. And I think the last piece is movement because my audience moved. And I think this was not discussed enough. There was a lot of reasons given why certain retailers were shifting locations to other places. I think a lot of it was just audiences are in different places than they were. So if a lot of people, and we saw this trend really early on in that post-pandemic period of people who were in there, kind of that older millennial moving to the suburbs. And what does that mean for where they frequent and who they're going to shop and where the opportunity now exists in those suburban areas versus in those urban areas. So I think a lot of it is really explained by those changes. A lot of the expansion plays were very successful. Some probably a little overreached, but those will be much more of an optimization play to bring back into account.
All right, thank you for that. Our next viewer has a question that falls into, I believe it was the slide when we talked about different segments. How do inherent purchase cycles play into electronics and DIY sales?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a big part of it, right? And I think that when we talk about that pull forward of demand, there was such an extreme surge in that space for a period of over a year that it was almost impossible to maintain. And you don't need to replicate as often, and therefore that pull forward of demand has an impact on future visits. So that the height of that peak is going to impact what happens in the years that follow. We are seeing that start to normalize again, so we're back to these kind of regular purchase patterns. And I do think obviously that has a big role to play, but I think a lot of it is also kind of consumer sentiment. Like, how confident do I feel in the economic environment? And there's certain purchases that I need to make. Look, I need to buy clothes for my child before they go to school. I need to buy school supplies. Do I need to buy a new couch? No. Do I need to upgrade my home office this year? Not necessarily. I can push that off. So I think a lot of it is those cycles, and a lot of it is where the consumer's confidence level is in terms of what's going to, not just how good things are going to be, but how stable they're going to be.
All right, thank you for that. Next question is on retail media. We know retail media has now come into physical store locations. What are the biggest obstacles to maximizing retail media potential in physical stores?
Accessibility, making it engaging and native, and making it in the store. So I quote Andy Murray all the time. He was on one of our webinars years ago, and he said the thing he dislikes most about physical in-store media is when it pulls you out of the physical experience. So here's a QR code, now go to your phone and do some searching. That is the antithesis of what we're trying to achieve. The whole point of omni-channel globally is to say physical channels are great for X, Y, and Z, and digital channels are great for A, B, and C, different things. And so let's optimize our digital channels for A, B, and C, and our physical channels for X, Y, and Z. It's the same from the advertising perspective. There are approaches to retail media that work brilliantly online, and they shouldn't be touched. They're great. That doesn't mean they work well in the store. So I think if we appreciate the store for what the store provides, discovery, close to the point of sale. And by discovery, I mean I'm in discovery mode. I'm open to ideas. When I go online to look for, I don't know, I'm in the grocery store. If I go online to do grocery shopping, I'm not thinking about, do I want cherry tomatoes or this type of tomatoes or heirloom, whatever it may be. When I'm in the store, I'm much more open to be inspired by what there is. And so we need to lean into those benefits. And if we build an accessible, not annoying experience around what the store actually provides, we're going to have a maximized retail media network opportunity within the physical environment.
Great. Well, thank you. So interestingly enough, we just had one of our viewers ask a question along those lines, talking about the relationship between online retail and physical retail. The previous question talks a lot about retail media, but is there anything else that you can expand on, or anything that you've observed on trends and how these two channels interact and influence one another?
So I think for all of the talk of omni-channel, harmonized retail, unified commerce, whatever terminology we want to use, we're not there yet. In most cases, we're shockingly not there. And essentially what we're doing now is we're building up channels. And that's great. It's a really important prerequisite. So we're making sure we have a store. We're making sure we have a good app. We're improving our store experience. We're making sure you can pick up things from the store, but we need it to be integrated. So I'll give you my favorite example. I walk into a store. I look for a product. Someone in the store helps me find that product. They're out of stock. Now what? How many times have we been in that experience where we then leave the store, look for it online, and buy it, whatever comes up first on our Google search, or we go to another location of a competitor and buy it there? So much of maximizing the experience is creating a unified, ensuring seamless experience, so that when I can't find the product in the store, the frontline worker says to me, you know what? I don't have it here, but we do have it at the other store that's 5 minutes away. I'm going to have it sent to your house. Or you can go pick it up there right now on your way home. Or I'm going to have it delivered to you. It'll be there in 2 days. That degree of interaction between those channels, while respecting the values of each channel, is what's key. And what's amazing then is to go on this kind of continue this, stump speech for why I'm excited about where we're heading, is that it gives us all these adjacent opportunities. So think of buy online, pick up in store. Buy online, pick up in store is amazing. It says I'm going to utilize the speed and efficiency of digital and the readiness and availability of the store, and then combine them together so I get speed and access, and I also get speed to get my item. What if we could create upsell in the buy online, pick up in store environment? So this is what Target does with their Starbucks locations. Hey, you bought a product, add in a coffee. Amazing. How do I do more of that? It's these adjacent steps that are going to unlock so much opportunity. And in fact, when we think about where innovation is heading in retail, way too much focus has gone into just walk out, cashierless checkout, drones, micro fulfillment, and not enough into optimizing or that adjacent step that's going to take the retail experience a big step forward.
Yeah, those are great points. I think we can all empathize with being in that situation where the store is out of something and we feel that moment of disappointment. Yet then if an associate comes over and says, you can get it right now, it really turns everything around and creates such a better experience and sentiment. We are going to take one more question, also along the lines of experience. How big of a role do you think experience will play in holiday retail this year?
I think it's going to play a big role, especially if we see continued growth from major shopping centers like outlet centers and malls, et cetera. Because those are the hubs for experience, right? If I can get you to come to the mall and spend the entire day, you're going to buy a lot more product. Whereas if you go, you shop, you find the things you want, and you head immediately home. So a lot of the value of experience is going to come from the landlords and their ability to create this wider day out, holistic experience that gives me the excuse not just to visit, but to spend more time.
All right. Well, looking forward to continuing this conversation as we get more into the fall and into holidays with you for what you're seeing for experiences and retail. This was fun as always, Ethan, and it is always so wonderful to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Marissa. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, well, thank you again. Such great content. And I want to remind our audience to please ensure that you check out the Placer 100 Retail and Dining Index Hub on emarketer.com to dive deeper into some of the data discussed today. And just before we close, a few housekeeping items to share a little bit more about what's happening across eMarketer's media channels. You can register for live analyst and tech talk webinars on our events page at emarketer.com/events. Don't forget to tune in to Behind the Numbers, which is our eMarketer Daily podcast. And finally, please subscribe to our various newsletters. Thank you all for joining us today. And thanks again to Ethan, the team at Placer.ai, and our eMarketer studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.